Jennison Asuncion. Am I pronouncing your name properly? Yes. So, okay, so Jennison is well, he's responsible for the Accessibility Awareness Day, and among all the things, amazing things that he has done with his career, right now he's responsible of the accessibility of LinkedIn, and recently he won this very prestigious award from Canada. It is the Queen Elizabeth II Award. This award was it's for the 60th birthday of Queen Elizabeth here in Canada, and he won this award because of all the achievements that Jennison did through his life. So you all want to hear him, so let's give a big applause to Jennison.
I first want to thank the kitchen staff for delaying dinner. It was allowed me time to get myself ready here. Good evening, bonsoir. J'ai né ici à Montréal, mais maintenant mon français n'est pas très bon. I'm going to switch to English now. I want to first begin by thanking Greg Gay and the organizers of W4A. It's kind of neat for me being here tonight because the only two W4A events I've been to is in 2007 in Banff, and here I am now back in the city of my birth, Montreal, to talk about accessibility. So that's really great. Now, I have to say before we begin that when Greg invited me, I really had to give some thought. I listened to some of these, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, listen to some of these requirements. He said, we want you to be politically incorrect. All right? He also said to me, they said, we want you to cast doubt on the established accessibility practices. All right? And they want me to rant. And I'm like, I want to have a job tomorrow. So no pressure, right? In all seriousness, so I don't know how controversial I'm going to be. Well, I only had one glass of wine, so it can't be that controversial. But I was sitting at Tiago's table, so that counts for something. But I hope to leave all of you with some food for thought. Maybe inspires some of you to rethink your current way you think about accessibility, or inspire you to take some action, or perhaps convince some of you to give up a life of academia and join me in the Silicon Valley to make some change over there. So I realize this is an academic conference, so there's a controversial statement. Give up academia and come work for big bad corporate. This is being videoed, right? Okay. So let me give you a bit of a quick tour of what we're going to do. And I realize it's late. We're also in one of the best cities in the world, Montreal. So there's a lot of stuff to do. So I'm underneath my jacket. I am watching my time on my watch. So let's do this. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. We're going to discuss some of the areas, or I'm going to discuss some of the areas where we, collectively in this room, as digital accessibility professionals, need to step in or step up if we want to make some profound changes. And then, here's the controversy for this academic conference. I'm going to very briefly talk about a strictly non-scientific random sample survey that I conducted before this event. So I'll look forward to hearing like all kinds of like, where's the methodology and all that. I'm ready, bring it. Okay, and we're gonna have some fun, okay? Because I always say this to people, accessibility it's important, and we take our jobs, all of us, we take our jobs so seriously. But it's really nice to come to a place like this and to a conference and to share a drink or three with people and just like find out what people are up to. Sometimes it can be stressful. You know, sometimes you feel like you're on your own trying to fight the big battles. So let's try and have some fun with this, okay? So a little bit about me. pausing. Okay. So as I mentioned, I was born and raised in Montreal. The fact that I'm Asian kind of betrays my real age. I look a lot younger than I actually am. So I grew up when screen readers weren't in vogue at all, and my first screen reader was actually my cousins and my sister reading to me what was on the screen while I was programming in BASIC on a Commodore 64 with a tape recorder. Yeah, someone just laughed there. Yeah, but you know, you can always be young at heart, right? And then it was always a lot of fun when they put me in front of an Apple IIc and made me draw with logo. So I'd have the turtle, and I knew, like I was trying to get a reaction from the teacher to see if they would say that's not a real shape. But it was always, oh, Jennison, that's a square, when I totally knew it wasn't, because I didn't do that. All right. I think for me, I first realized the power of technology to enable the lives of people with disabilities when I got to CEGEP, which is community college, CEGEP en français, community college. So here in the province of Quebec, you go to high school till grade 11, and then you have to take either 2 years of pre-university or 3 years of career college, and then you go work. So when I was growing up, let me step back for a second. I wasn't raised around or was exposed to people with disabilities growing up. I knew a couple of blind kids, but they were either older or younger, and they weren't always necessarily age appropriate. So I didn't necessarily understand that whole experience. I was raised, it might sound weird, but I was raised quote unquote in the sighted milieu, or the sighted world. So when I got to this community college, which is the largest, it's called Dawson College, it's the largest college here in Montreal that's English speaking. And then I was around people with a variety of different disabilities. There were people who were blind, but I met people who were deaf and had a variety of different learning disabilities and were in wheelchairs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things I did was I volunteered teaching computer stuff. Does anyone remember things like First Choice or, oh gosh, I heard someone say this. I'm not that old, but I need to step back. But Word Perfect 5.0 and all the old Word and all that stuff. So I ended up spending time teaching people with different disabilities how to do basic stuff. And it was fascinating to me, and it was great because I got to quote unquote see the power that technology could bring to to people. And then I participated myself in a program with the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, which is called the SCORE program, which brought, at the time, about 24 blind and low vision people from across Canada together to learn about technology. Now, before that, I was a big Braille user, so we're up to Braille. And all my books, a lot of my books were in Braille, which is why I think I'm going to have a chiropractor at some point. But I used a refreshable Braille display and all that kind of stuff. But I had never been exposed to other blind people, so I went to this program and I saw all the latest technology, refreshable Braille displays and bigger ones and all that kind of stuff. But I met all these other kids, teenagers who had different experiences, and some had access to technology, others didn't. But I knew there was something about technology that was going to be part of what I was going to do. I didn't know what it was at the time. And then fast forward to 1997, I became a research assistant with something called the AdaptTech Research Network, where I'm actually still with them now, even though I'm not obviously a grad person anymore. But we've been conducting research into the use of information and communication technology by college and university students with different disabilities across Canada for since '96. So I joined them in '97, so I've been there for almost 20 years. So through that research, I gained an appreciation for, from an empirical perspective, we were able to look at data and to see how empowering technology could be to people with a variety of different disabilities and impairments, and what would happen if they didn't have access to that technology. If you're interested, you can go to AdaptTech, adaptech.org to learn more about what we do there. So I've always been interested in technology and all that stuff, but when I graduated with my master's, I deliberately I did not want to focus on accessibility. and I'll say this because I can, it just seemed too convenient for the blind guy to go into accessibility. I wanted to do a bunch of other things. I'll admit some of it was trying to disprove some of the naysayers back in the day who may have been well-meaning, but were telling my family, you know, you should do this or that, and because they were trying to be helpful, but they weren't. But so I spent time developing e-learning. I had a master's in educational technology, so I designed e-learning. Then I was a project manager. And when I was a project manager at my second job, they asked me if I would be willing to give a hand with just like doing some testing for accessibility. And I said, so long as you ask me and you don't make it part of my official mandate in my job, then I'm happy to give a hand when I'm available. And they kept their word. But then, after being a project manager for about almost 5 years, it was time to move on. So I resigned from my job in the summer of 2006 with nothing waiting for me. That's it. Oh, by the way, I left Montreal and my support system and moved to Toronto and started soul searching to figure out what I wanted to do next. So I'd already done the project management, which was like going to business school, and I truly believe that is what has made me successful in accessibility, just to understand people and such. But at the time I was like, what am I going to do? What should I do, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, I ended up having some conversations with some trusted friends and other people, and I decided in 2006 to explore going into accessibility as a full-time career. And fortunately, for me, at that point, I found a job and worked for 7 years at the Royal Bank of Canada, which is Canada's largest bank. And I was part of their accessibility team. Now, I'm not a coder, although I had 2 false starts in computer science, one in college and one in university. So I knew enough, and I programmed in a couple of languages and this and that. But this job at the Royal Bank exposed me to everything to do with design and development. I was sitting with developers and being able to play with code, and so that really was a good opportunity for me to get close to that stuff and to learn how to negotiate with project managers and live the reality of accessibility in a large corporation. Then in 2013, in fact on a significant birthday, my 40th, I got recruited over Facebook to work at LinkedIn. My boss at the time sent me a message and said, hey, how would you like to come to give us a hand with accessibility? Now, let me step back and say I've been using LinkedIn since 2006. I'd already drank the Kool-Aid and have and will continue even wherever my career takes me next to talk about how important LinkedIn is. But I visited LinkedIn a couple of times just to show them as a user how it was to use LinkedIn with no agenda to go work there. I was like, there's no way I'm going to Silicon Valley. I don't have a degree in computer science or anything like that. But anyway, if you need proof of someone who gets a degree in political science that ends up working in Silicon Valley, managing a team of some of the finest Silicon Valley UI engineers that are passionate about accessibility, I guess I'd be one person you could point to. So that's the context. Now we move to the controversy. Okay. So let's talk about, I want to talk about a couple of the areas where I believe accessibility, we all, like I said, all collectively, whether in academia or corporate or whatnot, we need to consider stepping up a little bit. What's interesting is I know that Yuta, you're here, Yuta, right?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, Yuta, you had a little controversy yesterday, and David Sloan. So some of the stuff I'm going to say, hopefully both of you in particular and the rest of the room also will be shaking your heads in agreement just thinking about some of this stuff. So let's talk about accessibility, digital accessibility, the brand and perception. So I don't know about you, but how many of you, and you can just like moan or put your hands up and look at each other, but how many of you have gone to like a party or an event where you explain what you do, you're like, oh yeah, I work on accessibility and this is what I do, and you get the, oh that's nice, or That's really interesting kind of response. It's almost like we're spending our time walking our grandmothers across the street, for goodness sakes. Well, we're not. We're doing something that's really interesting and important. So there's this whole perception that accessibility, it's one of these like, oh, you know, it's helpful and all that kind of stuff. We need to think about how do we make it so that people say, that's cool, and how do I sign up for that? There's this other thing that, again, I guess I'm in a unique position to be able to talk about, is that accessibility, if anyone knows anything about accessibility, if you find Joe Blow on the street, or Joanne on the street, and you say, do you know anything about accessibility? More often than not, you're going to hear someone say, oh, do you mean like putting a description on an image for blind people? Accessibility, I know I don't need to tell anyone here, but accessibility is so much more than blind people. It has to do with, and the reality is blind people, if you do any sampling of populations, blind people make up the smallest group outside of folk who are totally blind and folk who are deaf. At least in the studies we've done at AdaptTech, and I think everywhere else, are the smallest group when you're doing sampling. You know, the larger groups are people with cognitive disabilities, with mental health disabilities, et cetera, et cetera. I guess blind people are just louder. But then here's the reality. So we need to think about this. And it was interesting, Aaron, I hope you're here. I don't remember your last name, but you presented this morning at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Are you here? Oh, sweet. Oh, thank you. You made the statement, you know, to people, you know, that people might not necessarily know about intellectual disabilities. And I was so happy when you were talking about that. Because we do. We need to, you know, part of this whole thing about accessibility and the branding, we need to move it away from just folks who are blind to the full range of people with different disabilities. Now, this is where it might get a little controversial. I'm going to keep saying that, hoping it will get controversial. But and I get this. So I've been working in accessibility now for over 10 years, if you count the time that I was informally doing accessibility also. But there's this thing that today where people are equating accessibility with usability, that there's a one-to-one match between the two. And so I see this particularly on Twitter and things, people are saying accessibility is usability, usability is accessibility. So I disagree. Wait, no one's going to go, hey, what do you say? But no, to me, accessibility and usability certainly they share much in common. But if you ask me, accessibility is about solving technological issues that the over 1 billion people around the world who have a disability or impairment may have. That's what accessibility is about. And I'm proud to be working on those problems. My big concern is that as we try to dilute or try to make accessibility more mainstream and kind of say, well, it is usability or whatnot, we may lose focus. And I know people aren't suggesting that usability practitioners would know everything that you need to know about using assistive technology and all those things that really are what accessibility is about. It's about understanding the experiences of people with different disabilities or impairments using their technologies. It's about understanding what happens in the code and what you need to do in the code. So, and again, like I said, I get it. I get why people because people are trying to make accessibility a more comfortable subject. But at the end of the day, let's remember what accessibility, for us, what digital accessibility is really all about. We're trying to make sure that people with different disabilities and impairments have the same opportunities as everyone else does. Full stop. Let's move on to the next subject. Another area where I believe we need more work and things to happen is we need to increase the pipeline of skilled technology professionals and graduates and researchers to come and work in the mainstream tech milieu. We need more people out there, whether it's working in an accessibility role or not, just out there understanding what the issues are and coming in to influence their teams of developers, designers, engineers, etc. Because we need that. We also need more people with different disabilities or impairments to enter technology careers. You know, working in the Silicon Valley, I know a few people with different disabilities and impairments. I gotta tell you, it's a little lonely. We need more people, you know, with disabilities we need us to be in there, because let's face it, you know, as a person with a disability, sometimes the argument can be made a lot more stronger to the executives or the senior engineers, et cetera, et cetera. You know, if we're showing them firsthand what it's like to experience using a product, et cetera, et cetera. So more needs to happen, and so what I might challenge, so I have a couple of challenges. One is, all of you who are working, whether you have a disability or not, think about reaching out in the high schools and seeing, you know, just call up a local high school or figure out a way to identify a student with a disability or impairment and get them excited about science, technology, and math, engineering, and math careers. You know, there's all this conversation these days about diversity in technology, but rarely do we hear a conversation about disability. And people with disabilities collectively make up the largest minority group in the world. So my ask there is for all of you, if you're not doing it already, and it doesn't have to be a huge elaborate thing, but just keep tabs of people, you know, try and identify people, kids in high school, who might be interested in science or those types of careers, and just talk to them, you know, about, and encourage them. Because certainly there's enough discouragement. I'm always sad to hear, even today, professors still discouraging people with different disabilities not to pursue careers in STEM particularly because it might be too difficult, or because there's a perception that math might be too difficult, things like that. But we all know that that's not the case. So that's something for all of us to do. We need to make accessibility easier to implement. So those of you who are working in the labs, creating tooling and stuff, I often hear this from mainstream front-end engineers, developers, whatever you want to call them, and designers, all of them. They want easy ways to implement accessibility. They want to do it, but in a short period of time, no one has time to read volumes of guidelines and standards and try to understand them. People want to see examples, real-world examples of actual implementations of accessibility. Marcy Sutton, who's a digital accessibility pro, has a website called Accessibility Wins. And she puts up there wherever she can find different examples of like accessible jQuery or accessible this and that, so that people have something to look at. And I mean, another thing I'll say is we in accessibility, rather than resisting and recommending against things, we need to embrace and accept the fact that there are new libraries and new technologies. And we need to jump in and help figure things out. We can't keep going, well, you can't use that, it's not accessible. People are just going to walk away. We need to be in there, we need to be listening. We talk, but we also do need to listen a little bit and understand, you know, this is, the reality is, the people upstairs who are looking after wanting to make profit for a company, they want the latest bells and whistles. They want things to sing so that the average consumer will use the product. They won't necessarily have the time or the interest, frankly, in understanding about, you know, inclusive design or things like that. They don't have the time. They need to implement something in a month. So we need to understand that. I'm not saying that's always going to be the case. You might find some proactive companies that are like, yes, we want to do this all right. But the balance of companies just want to get it out there. So we, you know, for those of you who are like tinkering in code and stuff, we need more people looking at the next tools out there and going, okay, it's not accessible now, let's get to it, let's start building. We need to broaden our focus when it comes to accessibility. People with disabilities want to do more than just bank, or check their email, or look for a job, or find out what their sister across the country is eating for breakfast. We want to vote. We want to be able to build our own technologies. We want to be able to read and sign digital documents. We want to be able to consume vast array of video that's out there today. We want to take advantage of all the latest innovations that are happening in health technology, e-health, and all of those things that the average person can take advantage of and can get, the latest information on, diagnoses or even be able to read their own electronic records. And some people want to do other things. Heaven forbid people with disabilities actually want to do online dating. So I guess where I'm going here is, the focus obviously because of the laws are on some of the bigger things. But keep in mind, people with disabilities are people too. So when you're thinking about all the technology out there, I'm so happy to see so much emphasis on gaming and accessibility these days. That's phenomenal. And there's a lot obviously on learning, which is one of the theme of this conference, and making sure people can learn anywhere, anytime. But we just need to broaden and look at other aspects of life, not just those key areas that are being made accessible because they're being legislated to be. So those are some of Jennison's key areas, and trust me, I could go on for a long time. But let's get to now this survey I took. I called it the Digital Accessibility Pulse Survey, which I ran starting on April 6th. In terms of where I went to find people, so this was a 3-question open-ended survey with one demographic question. It was in a Google form. And I went to find people on Twitter, through my friends on Facebook, and through my LinkedIn connections. And interestingly enough, the balance of my friends and contacts actually are not in accessibility. And that was important to me. So I had 64 responses, not bad, right? What I did, so let me talk a little bit about the demographics. I had 26 people who declared that they work in digital accessibility full-time. And let me just be clear, when I say digital accessibility, I'm talking about creating web and mobile apps and working on those to make those accessible. So there were 26. We had, if I can only read my own bill. I need an app for that. Okay. We had 12 people who said that digital accessibility was part of their formal mandate, but it wasn't their full-time job. So they were probably told, hey, make this accessible, right? This happens a lot, make this accessible, but they're not doing 100% accessibility. The next group, while digital accessibility is not a formal part of my job, I sneak it in when I can. And there were 15 people who said that. I don't work on accessibility, but I'm passionate about it. Was 7. And of course, I had none of the above. And there were actually 4 people. I'm very curious about those 4 people. What I'm going to do, so what I did is I excluded from my analysis the folks who said they worked in digital accessibility full-time, because, we're all opinionated in accessibility. So I wanted to find out how the average Joe and Joanne and people who weren't working in accessibility full-time thought about a couple of things. So here we go. So I asked 3 questions. I'm almost done, by the way. So I asked 3 questions. So the first question I asked was, what is the primary, notice I said primary because I didn't want people to give me a laundry list. What is the primary reason why most websites, mobile apps, are not designed and developed to be accessible by default? Now, does anyone want to shout out what the #1 reason was? Be interactive. Someone just say it, because don't raise your hand. I'm going to call out names for randomly. Who is that?
Crappy libraries.
Is that Ted?
Yeah.
Okay. That wasn't #1.
Time, probably.
Time?
Requires extra time to do that.
Was that the guy? Was that the gentleman from NatJax? Who is that? Who just said the time?
From Ryerson University.
Oh, from Ryerson. Perfect. Okay. Time was actually no. Time was 3. All right. So let me tell you.
No,
The number one reason that these folks said was lack of awareness and education. Now, all of you in here, not all of you, but many of you in here are probably saying, well, how can that be? You know, people with disabilities are everywhere, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let me tell you, in the domain out there, people are just shocked to know that people with disabilities can actually use computers. A lot of them are. I'm not saying like the people who don't, but the people who don't. So lack of awareness and education was the number one reason. The second one, which was interesting to me, and I'm glad people were honest because it was an anonymous survey, people perceive people with disabilities as being a small minority. So, I mean, there's nothing else I can say except that there's more than 1 billion of us around the world. I mean, I'm not sure what number would get more people interested, but that is what it is. And number 3 was additional effort and time. And I sometimes hear some of my colleagues in accessibility say that if you build accessibility in from the beginning, the time it takes, it will be negligible. From personal experience, that's not the case. Always. I had to sneak in the always in there. It's not always the case because sometimes you're going to be using a brand new library, so you're going to need extra time to research to see how to make that accessible. Sometimes it's going to take more time because the color palettes for people with low vision or people who are colorblind, there's going to be a bit of a fight between marketing and design and accessibility to get that to the right conformance level. So it's not always as easy as some might think. So additional time and effort, I think it really depends on the complexity of the project. But I don't think it does service to say as a blanket statement, if you implement accessibility or if you think about accessibility at the very beginning, the time to market won't be impacted. The next question I asked, what is the one thing that must happen? So I didn't give them a choice. It must happen in order to increase the number of accessible websites, applications, and mobile apps. And no surprise, the first one was increasing education. Now the second one was interesting, which was strengthening law. The law is one of those interesting things in accessibility because we always want to use the carrot over the stick. But here's the reality. Today we have a bunch of laws here in Canada, in Ontario, and in the US and in other countries for digital accessibility. But I think it would not be difficult for any of us to just find a random site that is not accessible. So while I would always go in not waving the law around, I do think strengthening laws would be helpful for those companies that need that encouragement. So I'm really hoping that in the US, that the Americans with Disabilities Act will soon much more explicitly mention web accessibility. It's in there now. If you talk to lawyers today, they'll say that web accessibility is covered under the ADA, but because it's not mentioned explicitly, it's harder to point to. There have been some laws that have come out, there have been some cases that have come out that have pointed to the ADA, but I really think that things will only become, things will move a little bit faster with a little bit of inspiration from law. And then the third one was, and Ted, you mentioned this, was about easier to use tooling and more examples. So we need more examples. Developers are always saying, show me a website that gives me an accessible X. And unfortunately, sometimes we can't do that. We can show them, well, this site kind of does it. So, I mean, if some of you could just get together and lock yourselves in a room and just start to like pumping out some accessible examples of different widgets and using different JavaScript frameworks and all those kinds of things, that would do a world of good to helping us all move things forward. The last question I asked was, I made a statement that there is a shortage of skilled technology professionals working on digital accessibility. And here, just to give context, I mean in kind of like the mainstream tech or the corporate technology area. And I asked why was this the case? And again, no surprises. Not enough. Well, one of the actually this one was interesting. Not enough companies make accessibility enough of a priority was one of them. And then the second most mentioned one was accessibility is not viewed as a priority. So that's was the findings of the survey. And in fact, what I'm going to do, what I promised to do, is kind of actually compare the responses from the people who work in digital accessibility full-time versus everyone else to see what the responses will be, because I suspect there'll be a little bit of a difference. There's a little bit of a, it's different when you're inside, working on it, within large complex companies as opposed to, not necessarily being in a place full-time, having to deal with relationships, wanting to build long-term relationships with developers and designers so that they don't run away from you when you walk by, so that they think that accessibility is something worthwhile to do. So how do I want to close? Because I am going to close now. So I want to make a couple of statements. One is it is great to be back at this conference. One of the things I was heartened to find was to meet a number of the students who are actually have decided to study computer science and engineering and whatnot. And yes, I have spoken to a couple of them about considering coming to work out in Silicon Valley. But yeah, so I'm really happy about that. I encourage all those of you doing research to submit your papers to mainstream technology conferences as well. And not necessarily like mainstream conferences within the disability track, but in the regular track, so that we all together are kind of moving to make accessibility something that is comfortable for people to talk about. So that's one thing. There's tons of other conferences and things for people to get involved with, but I just want you all to consider like the big mainstream conferences as well. It's great that this W4A is part of the larger WWW conference, but I know that there's a bunch of other conferences out there that don't have an embedded accessibility piece. And I just think we need to challenge conference organizers by submitting papers and talks and discussing accessibility where they are, where they live. And that's it, that's all I have. Now, if I have to take any questions, I may have to get my lawyer on the phone. Are there questions?
I think we're doing questions, yes.
Be gentle.
So, any questions? I can see.
No? You all have a $50 bill under your pocket.
Okay, yes. The person, yeah. He has a question. Peter.
You also work in the private sector. How do you try to sell accessibility? I've been trying to do it for 8 years. It's hard, I find.
In the private sector?
Yeah.
Yeah, so honestly, if you don't have the leadership buy-in, that's where it needs to start. You need to have your leaders, your directors, you need to have your senior managers talking about accessibility in the regular, like all hands for their developers and product managers. You need to have those folks talking about accessibility. So unless you are able to get that senior level support, it is very difficult.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Try.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes, we have the one in the back. Yes, David Smith. Yeah.
Jennison, if you had to choose between advising somebody to leave academia to go into industry, would you want them to go into a mainstream tech company or join an accessibility consultancy?
I would want them to go into the mainstream.
Yes.
I would want them to spend some time there first for a number of years, and then make a decision if they wanted to go into an accessibility consultancy. But certainly no, mainstream first. Anyone else?
sorry, Chris LaRoche from Boston.
Hey.
Hey, I have a question. I'm a usability person that fell into accessibility.
Right.
So I kind of want to talk to you more about what your point about how accessibility and usability aren't the same. But I think the model of usability and how successful they've been in the last 20 years is, in my mind, what accessibility should work for to become mainstream at high level volume. Because I think if you don't do that, it won't become as powerful as usability is.
Right. And I guess my point there is just it's so easy to just get, you know, as soon as you say, you know, accessibility is usability, and then you talk.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's the same thing, but I think the model of usability
Right.
should be a good model for accessibility.
Right. Fair enough. And I know I should say, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that within accessibility, for those of you who might not know, there's an organization that formed last year, I believe, called the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, or IAAP. That would certainly value the contributions of folks from this room, but they are in the process, or they've created a certification for accessibility professionals. They've actually just launched the first running of their general, I think it's the general practitioner of accessibility, and after you write that, they're going to create some more. So I think that they are, to your point, Chris, they are looking to usability in other disciplines to see how to create that discipline, how to create rigor, certification to get accessibility recognized more professionally.
Okay. Yes, we have
Are we finished?
another question.
Oh.
Yes.
Is David Berman.
Hey, David.
We're looking for some controversies. There is a question. What do you think we would have to do as a community to convince Apple to only allow accessible apps into the App Store?
I think that's a great conversation for us to have offline.
Okay, another question.
I know. Let me just say this. Let me just answer, David. Just in terms of companies in general. So I'm not going to single out Apple because we need to push all companies, right? Any company that provides lots of apps, and there's more than Apple out there that are doing this. We need to maybe sit down, identify the people who are running those stores or those places where all those apps are, and sit down with them and have an intelligent, neutral conversation with them to help them understand. Shaming them over social media, that's not going to be the way to do it. Yelling, suing, all that kind of stuff. Let's find out who those people are who are making the decisions, because those people might be so far removed that they don't even know that that's something that they should be doing, because there are so many people underneath who might be kind of keeping that conversation, quelling it. But I think there's a lot that can be done, and I think there's a lot of companies who are in a position to make all of they're in a leadership position where they should be making their apps accessible.
So we have another question, right?
So Jennison, since you're at LinkedIn, how can you help us get more people applying for our jobs that have disability, that are not engineers, that are not accessibility experts?
So I think I'm gonna take off my LinkedIn hat because I don't think I think I can answer this as Jennison. I think that companies. So is your question, how do we find the talent to fill accessibility roles, or how do we find people with disabilities to come work in our companies?
How can we find people with disabilities to fill all of our positions?
Sure. So I can have a total rant on this. So one thing we need to do is every large tech company has an intake through internships and through new hired graduate positions. We need to first educate the recruiters in those areas because they're the ones going into the schools. They need to be contacting the offices for students with disabilities and encouraging students with disabilities to come to the career fairs and all those things, or to set up time where they're at the offices for students with disabilities to sit and meet with interested students there. So that's one piece. And we need to educate the recruiters so that they're not freaked out when a person with a disability comes up and goes, hey, can I have an internship at your company? And they weren't educated that the student can do stuff. So that's one thing. Then we need to make sure that the people on the ground at the companies are positioned and have the tools that they need and the training they need to bring on, to hire a person with a disability to come work on their technologies. Ted, I think you know as well as I do, one of the elephants in the room is that some of the major technologies that, for example, a developer or a QA person would need to use in a job are not necessarily where they need to be from an accessibility perspective. So we'd also have to look at that stuff. And then we'd also need to just train recruiters at technology companies that are looking at tons of resumes that are coming through, that if someone self-discloses that they have a disability, and on their resume it doesn't look like they've had much work experience, not to just discount them. You have Joe, who doesn't have a disability, who's done like a bunch of internships at a lot of tech companies, and then you might have Susan, who, because of her disability or impairment, had to go to school part-time and couldn't even think of working part-time as well. So we need to educate the hiring managers and the recruiters to take a second look and make sure that people are being judged on the talents that they bring, academic talents as well as other things and their passions. And I think that will go a long way in making those jobs and bringing in more people with disabilities. I'll just say quickly, like I said, I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but I just tweeted about Microsoft just has a scholarship now. It's due Friday, and it's sad that I only heard about it recently, but there is an example of a company. They're looking for people who are studying STEM, business, or law, who are going to their first year of college next year. So we need more companies to also do things like that. And so through internships, through hiring managers, through making the actual tools of the trade more accessible, that's how we'll get more people with disabilities coming into tech careers. And through mentoring, like I talked about, all of us here, everyone has that charge now to find at least one high school student with a disability in their town that's interested in technology, and just listen to them, talk to them, be their mentor.
Okay, Tiago,
I'm ready, Tiago.
You told us a lot about how we can impact the world regarding accessibility. And you told us a little bit about your story on that road to talking about accessibility and changing all accessibility or all the products are regarding accessibility. So my question is, so ideally, now you are at the company working on accessibility, so ideally, what's your next step? To increase the impact of accessibility.
When the time comes that I leave my current job, no, you know what's really interesting to me? So Mayor de Blasio in New York City, maybe a month and a half ago, came out with a statement saying that he wanted to make New York City an accessible place, and he included digital stuff. I would love to be a chief accessibility officer for a city, and to help, because that's the nuts and bolts. That's where people are living, right? We're talking about in city government and local government and all that stuff. That touches all of us day to day. So I think that would be something interesting. After I'm finished what I want to finish in Silicon Valley.
So,
We good?
I think we are good. Yes? Okay, next time, Jennison, please, this was